I say to the last Honourable Senator, Mr. President, that you can't criticize the government for not bringing the Electrical Supply Act to deal with all of these issues. No, because for one, I have been trained that you cannot change the rules after the game has started. An application has gone in to the minister for a new license by the operator, the Barbados Light and Power Company. You cannot change the legislation to affect that application once the application is in and objections have already gone in. What we can do is to streamline the process and make it fair. This is the object of this bill. But for the government to go and make legislative changes by abolishing the act and bringing an entirely new piece of legislation when the application in would end up in court, in my view. And it would not necessarily end well for the government because it cannot do that. So for those who are there saying that this amendment is just been dressing and it should not be brought and the government should scrap the whole thing and bring the whole new piece of legislation, are not looking at all of the factors that should be considered. But this government is on the ball, Mr. President. And I applaud the Honourable Minister for leading this team in the Senate, because we have got the time since this bill was laid to look at the bill, to consult with the officials within the ministry, and to do our own private research. I certainly have benefited from speaking to a number of players in the sector to understand what the issues are. And since this bill has been laid in the Senate and has been on the order paper, I've taken time, sir, to listen to a lot of the contributions and the proceedings in the rate hearing before the Fair Trading Commission, and to read the motions that have been brought by the interveners and other parties, and to try to understand the byplay in that discourse, to inform this whole process, because the process of governance in the 21st century has become more complex. And if we are going to make informed contributions and to be able to facilitate discussion at the national level on policy and as how we go forward, we have to delve deeper into these issues. So that I don't share the view, Mr. President, that, for example, the government is being stingy with 28 days to make an objection. Certainly, if you want to intervene to make representations as to why an application should not be granted, should not be continued, or should not be renewed, or we want to object, you cannot stall the process of somebody's application by dithering. It is not fair to them. 28 days is not 28 minutes. It is almost a whole month. And when we look at what the legislation requires someone to do, Mr. President, the applicant's application is set out, and the legislation now, this bill now requires the person who wants to make representations to specifically set out concisely the nature and the grounds of the representation or the objection. It also requires you to put in supporting evidence, so that if the detailed application is presented and it is out there in the public domain, published as required by the legislation, how long should the minister require what I call them interesting parties, because that's what the legislation calls it, but Barbadians understand them to be interveners, the people who come in. How long is the period? That should be, if 28 days is too short a period. How long? 3 months? So that applications for storage, applications for generation, and all the other things that are in play under the new structure for renewable energy, how long can they be held up? Because there is a conscientious Barbadian citizen who is looking out for the interests of the public. How long? So the government is being accused of stifling democracy. That's what the bywords out there for all of the people in social media, that all of a sudden we are autocrats and demagogues, and all of a sudden 28 days is unreasonable time, Mr. President. Every litigant in the court system in Barbados has 28 days to file a defense to any claim filed against them. In all of the established common law systems around the world, 28 days is the time limited to respond to a claim filed against you. So that the notion that the government is now imposing this 28-day deadline out there to stymie the work of these conscientious objectors and be trying to kill off democracy, I understand where these dog whistles are why these dog whistles are being blown, and is intended to paint the government in the wrong way for political and partisan reasons, sir. But we have a government and a society to run, and the government cannot stymie the process of the applications in this very important sector, because the interests of these so-called conscientious objectors, and I have no challenge with them because I have spoken to many of them in my preparation for this debate and to understand the issues going on in this very important sector. And they have played a very, very important role in bringing light to us. I've seen that the minister has met with the engineers and other stakeholders and going out there, and these people are making valuable contributions. But all of them are not people without wit or education or intelligence. These are people who are out there actively engaged in the sector. If you listen to the people in the Barbados Renewable Energy Association, the engineers and the coalition of cooperatives, these people have technical expertise in this sector. The government has a public council to which the members of the public can raise their concerns, and the public council has an office that is staffed to assist members of the public in these exercises. So the notion that the government is being stingy and being autocratic by only allowing 28 days is an unfortunate slant. And I think that the record must be publicly corrected that this is not the case at all. Sir, I have to take aim at the situation in which we find ourselves with this particular application, because I am not happy that the Barbados Light and Power Company, I have no issue with the Barbados Light and Power Company, but they have a sole shareholder called Emira, a Canadian entity, which has, when we look at the motions before the Fair Trading Commission, and we look at the deliberations and the proceedings of that rate hearing, one has to question whether or not, in the interests of this country, whether any licenses of that nature should be allowed to be given to an entity that owns 100% of the shares. Because I agree with the contribution of Senator Dr. Maynard. You have a company where the annual average income is about $48.8 million a year since the last rate hearing. And they are paying out average dividends about $41.5 million a year, leaving only about $7.6 million left in the company in terms of income and for reinvestment and so on. So that inversion since Emira has taken over of the rate of payment of dividends as to what is reinvested in the company creates a significant problem for me as a Barbadian citizen, as a consumer, and as to what is required to maintain the national energy infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, and to put back in investment. When I hear before the commission that a rate increase was granted in 2011 so that they could put new capacity in to generate electricity, they have not done so, but they're now coming in 2021 for another rate increase. I ask myself the question, I'm not trying in any way to influence the decision of the Fair Trading Commission. But and I'm not even trying to, I've had no discussion with the Honourable Minister because she has her technical committee to advise her. It comprises the Chief Town Planner, a whole set of technocrats and Government Chief Electrical Officer, all these people who advise her. But I must come here, Mr. President, and raise my profound difficulty with the approach of the leading shareholder in the Barbados Light and Power. Because as I've said, I have no issue with the Barbados Light and Power, but I have an issue with how Emira has used Barbados as a cash cow since their investment of $200 million in the Barbados Light and Power. They've invested $200 million in Barbados Light and Power, Mr. President, by buying those shares and have extracted over $538 million in dividend payments. And are now asking for a new license and at the same time asking the Fair Trading Commission to grant them a rate increase, while not investing a single penny until their application for the rate increase in new infrastructure in Barbados. And at the same time, they have obtained a rate increase in 2011 to do the same infrastructural improvements. So that when this legislation was created or passed into law in Barbados, under the last administration, I did not hear anybody questioning the bona fides of those actions about democracy and empowering people. And it seems that for the time I've been following and being involved in politics, those accusations are only pointed in one direction. But Mr. President, if the Barbados government did not sell or force the national insurance funds to sell the 11% shares it had in the Light and Power Company, imagine 11% of the $538 million if that was available to the National Insurance Fund. Could you imagine that? A company that just generates profits and dividends. But the last administration sold those shares, gave controlling interest to Emira. And we have to come back into office to clean up all of this, and then we are hearing all these things that we are autocrats and dictators, and we trying to squeeze out the small man and the conscientious, we consider them nuisances. So that is kind of offensive to me, sir. It is really offensive because these issues are not seemingly ventilated when the other side is in office. And we must sit and mum with all of these criticisms all of the time, and then people pretend that all of a sudden we know all the good things that should happen to Barbados, and we need to safeguard Barbados from the Barbados Labour Party. So these things happen under the Dems. And then, I want to make a point here, because I made a note here. Sir, the audited financial statements of Barbados Light and Power shows that the dividends payments, as I said, is 500. Senator Maynard made the same point. So the 2010 rate increase decision capped dividends at 12.5% in terms of return, maximum rate for the return of capital. 12.75%. So if you look at the $200 million investment, the maximum annual dividends payable to shareholders should be about $25.5 million per year. Mr. President, they exceeded that dividend payment of $25.5 million in every year from 2011 to 2019, except for 2 years, in 2013 and in 2018. And you know what was significant about 2013 and 2018? Those are 2 election years. So they have taken out a cumulative total of $283.375 million in excess of the cap that was granted by the FTC in the 2010 decision. So that the Labour Party does not come to this debate under siege, Mr. President, because we know where the real concern out there should be. What we are trying to do, Mr. President, is to navigate within an international environment where climate change and the climate crisis and the energy crisis, inflation, all these things are hovering around. And to try to get this economy and society moving again. But at the same time, we have to put our shoulders to the plow to ensure that this sector that seemingly was not under a single ministry for 10 years. But the minister had all the powers to grant licenses, to renew licenses, to revoke licenses, and no conditions settled in law, no certainty settled in the process. But we get vilified in the public for putting certainty into how representations and objections can be considered by the minister, while at the same time preparing a more comprehensive suite of legislation to put it on a more proper regulatory footing. So that if I sound a little animated, and I am not, the Christmas spirit has not departed from me, Mr. President. It is because of the issues. Sir, I also want to draw notice to what I consider to be a more egregious sin from Emir as well. In the early 1990s, when self-insurance became a problem, Light Power had to create a self-insurance fund to protect its assets, the plant, equipment, and everything here in Barbados. In 2016, $100 million was taken out of that self-insurance fund and converted into dividends and paid out. And when you look at the regulations which govern that self-insurance fund, you got to wonder, 2016, how could because America cannot take the money out of Barbados unless they get central bank exchange control permission. And you wonder why, when the government sold the shares to Emir, we've got to try to understand and try to unravel these things. Nobody was asking these questions. But you cannot get off scot-free by not jumping onto the bandwagon to pretend that you're all dressed in lily white. Come into politics, and I'm not talking about the Honourable Sanders in here, but to lead the charge against this Barbados Labour Party when the institution that you're now a part of, all these things were going on. $100 million taken out of the fund, converted it into dividends. So if we had a national catastrophe, we had a massive hurricane, the fund that was overcapitalized, I hope that you have adequate insurance cover for it. Because when I hear the insurance companies speak about the risk associated now with insurance because of we sit in a hurricane belt, these hurricanes are much more severe and impactful now. It doesn't seem to make sense that a few years ago, 6 years ago, you could allow a company to take $100 million and convert it into dividends. This is what the government is being unfortunately blamed for. So the sins don't lie in this administration, Mr. President. They do not lie in anything that this minister or the previous minister has been doing. So that I quite think that the amendments to this legislation are really very reasonable. You cannot get a license unless the interested parties are given an opportunity to make representations and objections. I have my views as to where that application process and any objections or representations process should go, but I am not that fortunate to be in the place where those final decisions are made. I'm sure the Honourable Minister has been doing her tour of duty. I am told, I've seen it in the press, I've spoken to her, trying to find out all the sectoral interests and to keep any decisions that this Barbados Labour Party administration makes, any decision that we make will be made on the basis of the best available information, consideration, and consultation. So that the government is not being anti-democratic. I've heard that word in here today suggesting that somebody doesn't like democracy. All of a sudden, but those are dog whistles that are being blown, Mr. President, as I said, and we understand it. But you cannot be surprised if we have to respond in this way, because if there is an enemy on the horizon, it is not the Barbados Labour Party. We will do right by the people of Barbados. We have always taken energy seriously. You got to just go back to a manifesto from the Tom Adams era. I heard Senator Dr. Rogers speak about the work of Professor Oliver Headley. But the 1970s and 81 manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party spoke about wind, solar, and wave energy. How many times again, power in 1986 to shut down all them projects? Never had a Ministry of Energy. So that, Mr. President, I have the fullest confidence in the Honourable Leader of the Senate that she would continue to do sterling work in pulling this together. And when we bring the electricity supply bill to this Honourable Chamber, it will be a bill that is well thought out. It might not be something that everybody will agree with, because you can never get that in a society. And I'm sure there'll be people who will be able to pick everything apart, but it will be as a result of hard work, determination, grit to get this country moving and going in the right direction. Before I close, Mr. President, I take the opportunity to wish you and all the honourable senators here all the very best for the Yuletide season, and may you all return in one piece, healthy, and raring to go in 2023. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Nichols. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I rise to beg the suspension of the Honourable Senate for lunch for a period of 1 hour and to reconvene at 3:25 p.m.
If there are no more speakers, Senator Cummins will wind up.
I am told,
No more
Mr. President.
speakers? Senator Cummins, please wind up.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I am told that the pull of that free day is strong in this honourable chamber, and that there are those who have on this day curtains to hang, house to clean, wood to varnish, pork leg to buy. Somebody just said. And Maisie and her reindeer was just outside.
I think Senator Cummins, there are no such considerations. I think there is the efficiency.
It was the efficiency.
We want to have an efficient energy system and an efficient debate.
But, Mr. President, I want to thank all the honourable senators for their consideration, and I want to perhaps begin to close the debate by going where Senator Nichols ended. Mr. President, the Cabinet last month approved the electric supply bill in its draft. Mr. President, we approved that draft, and that draft, because we believe in democracy and transparency, is presently with the Chief Parliamentary Council to be cleaned up, to go out to a word that has been used in this honourable chamber and the other place repeatedly, public consultation with stakeholders. It is expected, Mr. President, that long before that piece of draft legislation comes to this place, that all stakeholders will have the benefit of a full consultative process that will inform the finalization of the draft legislation before it comes back to the Cabinet for final approval. And I know this, Mr. President, because I took over the responsibility for the Ministry of Energy on the 27th of October. And that bill was in an advanced stage of drafting, as referred to by the previous Minister of Energy when he spoke at the Barbados Chamber of Commerce. And with him, alongside him for several weeks, maybe a week and a half, together with all of the technical teams, the geologists, the chief project research analysts, the attorneys, the consultants, we together finalized that draft before it was sent to Cabinet and then on to the CPC. This ain't a fly-by-night government, Mr. President, and we do not make up policies and draft legislation because we feel like it. We have the benefit of the best technical advice and expertise available to us to enable us drafting, and where we don't have it, Mr. President, we buy it in from the private sector or from international service, international partners. I have also already said, Mr. President, but I'll come back to that in a minute, I'll come back to that. Mr. President, that particular piece of legislation is important, and here's why it is important. And Senator Drake's, when she spoke about, Mr. President, the number of amendments made to this legislation, that isn't even the half of it yet. It is true, but that's not even the half of it. In making reference to the telecom section, what in 2013 the then administration should have done when they made these amendments was to do the work that this administration has done to create entirely new legislation and to have then repealed and replaced the 2013 legislation with what we know will have as the Electricity Supply Act. And what was done in the telecoms sector when we had a monopolistic service provider functioning and new entrants coming into the market and the liberalization of the sector, but which was never done for the electricity sector, Mr. President. That was not done before, but we are going to do it now. And we are doing it in a fully open and transparent way, as is the Barbados Labour Party way, Mr. President. It's not going to be perfect. We're not going to have all of the components ready at all times, and it's not going to be drafted in the perfect way. We will do the best that we can with all of the resources available to us. And if we have to make amendments, well, so be it. We will have to do so, but we would have put a regime in place that treats to the design issues rightfully described by the Honourable Senator on the other side, where she has spoken quite accurately about the engineering components that are necessary, how the grid was not designed for what we now have and needs to be completely recalibrated to meet the needs of where we are now, but also take into consideration that where we are now, Mr. President, I promise you it's not where we're going to be next year, because this is a fast-moving sector. Which brings me in reverse to the comment that 28 days is a short period of time. Mr. President, I cannot even begin to say how many times on the business side of this ministry and on the international business side of this ministry, Barbados as a country is accused of taking too long to do everything. I, Mr. President, have a favorite book that I refer to a lot of times. Michael Porter's Competitive Advantage of Nations. I loved that book. I maintain everyone has come out, I have bought The Competitive Advantage of Nations. The notion, Mr. President, that the world is waiting for you to come up to speed with fast-moving technologies, in particular in instances like fast-moving and emerging sectors, it doesn't even exist in reality, Mr. President. Michael Porter tells us that the competitive advantage, the competitive nation of today is overtaken by the competitive nation of tomorrow. And Barbados, in positioning itself, and I believe that Senator Rogers, when he talked about the history of Barbados in RE and solar, in particular the use of solar for hot water heating, was overtaken by many other countries, starting, I believe it was with Israel first, and many others followed thereafter. Are we saying that a country we have articulated is to be the research and development capital of the world, is to be the innovator of the world on the question of RE? Are we saying that the nation that is leading philosophically globally on the net zero targets and on climate resilience as small developing states is also simultaneously going to be a slow mover and not a first mover? No, Mr. President, that is not the ambition of this government. We will not always get it right. I say that again, because this is a fast-moving sector. The technology is evolving, and Mr. President, Senator Rogers spoke about Professor Headley. But there's another Barbadian innovator with whom I intend to engage, and I intend to reach out, a young man called Carlton Cummins, Mr. President. He, a young engineer, Mr. President, has developed technology and batteries and battery storage long before we were having this conversation, Mr. President. And it is my commitment to reach out to him in the early part of the new year, because as part of my engagement with entities like the Barbados Manufacturers Association that I have said, the Barbados Renewable Energy Association that I have said, the Green Council of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce like I have said, the Barbados Energy Cooperatives as well, all of those entities in the private sector who are practitioners and technicians functioning in the field every single day, they have a perspective. And as Minister, I commit to making sure that those perspectives are heard and they are engaged. And locally and globally, we will engage not just on a bilateral basis, yes, Senator Maynard, with countries in joint ventures with whom we can collaborate, yes, but also with our industry partners here, and yes, with the University of the West Indies, and absolutely with young Barbadian illustrious entrepreneurs like Carlton Cummings. So, Mr. President, I give that commitment. I want to address a couple of things specifically here. The HOPE project is not in peril in any way, shape, or form. The government of Barbados and all of its partners that are involved in the HOPE project has made sure that there has been a carve-out, and if you were to speak with the Barbados Light and Power, they would say that there must be a carve-out for dedicated projects like that, and that has already taken place. That preceded me and was done also by the previous Minister of Energy in collaboration with the Barbados Light and Power and all of the other stakeholders. Mr. President, I want to speak specifically to the Barbados Labour Party manifesto very briefly. Now, a few of us have spoken about the Barbados Labour Party manifesto as far back. I believe Senator Nichols, in his contribution, he also spoke about it. But, Mr. President, the Barbados Labour Party manifesto of 2022, January, just the other day, addressed many of the issues raised first by Senator Malalou, specifically on the question of electric vehicles. The Prime Minister, the Honourable Prime Minister, in her March 2022 budgetary statement and proposals spoke also about the tax regime for electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles as a bridge to full electrification, including the ability to have charging stations. So those things are also there. There has been, as we know, a significant investment in public transportation and greening our public transportation system. We have more electric buses that are expected to also be procured. Those are actually being procured under the Ministry of Energy, under the Green the Smart Fund. And we have, Mr. President, an additional 20 electric buses that are going to be added to the fleet that have already been ordered in collaboration with the Ministry of Transport. So that is there. But there's a policy commitment that the Barbados Labour Party made in January, Mr. President, that says we commit to a 21st century public transportation system that has a 15-year master plan inclusive of vehicles powered by green fuels. So we're not just talking only about electric vehicles, but there is a conversation, and I also have the privilege of leading the BNOCL, which was referred to here earlier, the National Petroleum Company, which also has not been mentioned, but they are the ones that typically supply natural gas. And I am pleased to share that I have met with the NPC, and I've met with the Barbados Manufacturers Association, and I've asked the Barbados Manufacturers Association, tell me what it takes to green manufacturing in this country. What are your timelines? What does it take for you to transition from now to bridging fuels in the interim until we get to the stage where we're using cleaner fuels? And I've had manufacturers say to me something as simple as, our equipment now is nearing end of cycle. If it is the commitment of government that we want to make this transition, then all we need is a notice period that allows us, when it's time to make the investment, to allow for the transition to take place, so that when we retrofit our new facilities, that they are in keeping with the kind of vision for Barbados 2030 and that net zero commitment, Mr. President. This is a consultative mechanism. There are different perspectives and different values, and we need to be able to benefit from all of them. Finally, Mr. President, also in response to the question of enfranchisement and ownership beyond hope, beyond the right to renewable energy, Mr. President, this is also an administration that in 2022 January published in its manifesto about the commitment to establishing a sovereign wealth fund. It is in our manifesto, Mr. President. We talked about the patrimony, to use the words of the Honourable Senators, of Barbadians, wind, sun, offshore, onshore, all different forms of shared patrimony, and to establish this fund not just for ourselves today, but for future generations because of the importance of our shared patrimony. This administration, Mr. President, and every Barbados Labour Party administration, Mr. President, does not just plan for today, is not just opportunistic about what is being presented to us today. We always have had the benefit of visionary leadership that lays out where we want to take this country. And this administration, led by Mia, the Honourable Mia Amor Motley, who is known on a first-name basis by leaders around the world on the basis of her climate advocacy, her commitment to a net zero future, the way in which she is positioning Barbados to be a world leader in energy, particularly clean energy technology and clean energy development, is something of which we are quite proud. So, Mr. President, I want to close my comments by expressing my commitment to every honourable senator who has spoken here today. I am not disagreeing at all with my colleague, with the colleagues who have raised concerns about the Barbados Light and Power. There are concerns for sure, and I'm committed to ensuring that when we sit around the table, the discussions will be and have been robust. We've already started, for example, speaking to Light and Power about simple things. What are your plans, not just for PV, but how do we look at the energy mix and your cleaner use of fuels, Mr. President? So you are currently using heavy fuel oil in some instances. What does a cleaner generation capacity look like for you as a Barbados Light and Power? And how do we begin to plan for that? And so finally, Mr. President, as I mentioned before, yesterday I had the opportunity to preside over the kickoff meeting, the preliminary kickoff meeting with the UN Special Envoy for Energy, who is going to be working with us on developing all of the things that we have just described. What is the energy mix? What are the timelines for this transition? What is the investment necessary? Is it going to be in the trillions of dollars, as is the case with Nigeria, or is it going to be in the billions? It is going to be a significant investment. What is the philosophy of Barbados vis-a-vis enfranchisement, inclusion, ordinary Barbadians, institutional investors, foreign direct investors, local investors? All of those that are the considerations that will go into the elaboration of our transition plan. And I am confident, Mr. President, that based on the caliber of the persons and the professionals in all of the agencies with whom I have engaged so far, that this Barbados is up to the task. And on that basis, Mr. President, I commend this draft amendment to this honourable chamber, and I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Honourable senators against, please say nay. We think the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate dissolve itself into a committee for further deliberation on this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable Senate dissolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The next, the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee. Clause 1.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
Question is that Clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Clause 2.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. Clause 3.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 do now stand part. Will all honourable members in favour please say aye? Aye. Will those against kindly say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Will all honourable senators against please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Electric Light and Power Amendment Act 2022.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Electric Light and Power Amendment Act 2022. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This brings us to the end of official government business, not just for the day, but for the year. And I want to use the opportunity, Mr. President, I hope. This brings us to the opportunity, God forbid there's an emergency that brings us back to Parliament before the end of year, but let's hope all goes well and we get a much needed break from all of our work-related activities and have some time to spend with family. I want to take the opportunity, though, to thank every honourable senator for their contributions this year. I know it has been a difficult year. We know that there has been obviously a certain level of sacrifice that comes with being in the Senate, and certainly at this time of the year, on this week of the year, very few people would want to spend an entire day debating technical bills. Their brains have already clocked out, and we want to be able to begin to breathe for a little bit. But I want to thank the honourable senators, every honourable senator. I want to thank the clerks of Parliament and staff from Parliament who spend not just the time that we are here, but the time leading up to our meetings, every time preparing for our meetings, making sure that the documentation is prepared, interacting with the government printery, and ensuring that we're able to get our notices on the order paper, and are also able to guide us during the course of the deliberations. And in particular, Mr. President, I want to thank the staff of Parliament for their guidance, particularly given the fact that we have a number of new senators with whom the familiarity with the procedures of Parliament was not always there. And so we thank you very much for your patient technical guidance as well. Thank you. I want then also to thank the police officers and all the other staff who are here with us, and to wish everyone the happiest holiday season and to have a fantastic holiday period. We will be going downstairs momentarily. I believe that there is a bit of a Christmas lunch that we will have, and I believe that downstairs we will have the opportunity there to share lunch with the security staff, with our police officers, with the caterers and the staff of the catering staff, and to express our appreciation to them for the service that they render to us throughout the year. I'm looking forward to joining you downstairs in a few moments. Happiest of holidays to all of you, and thank you in particular, Mr. President, and you, Madam Deputy President, for your sterling leadership of this honourable chamber throughout this year. And so with these few words, second time I've said a few, but I've not said a few words, I wish to beg the adjournment of the Honourable, the Senate, sine die.
Senator Dr. Hines.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too am looking forward to this lunch and wish everyone all the best. However, as this may very well be our last meeting, I note that the order paper still shows the question that I asked because I believe I have not received a written response and that it will remain on the order paper until such time. Therefore, I am just seeking clarity as to when I will receive the formal written response to the question, or is it an error on the order paper?
The matter is on the order paper until the written response comes, as the rules dictate.
Sorry, Mr. President. I was not certain if that means that I will just have to wait indefinitely until I receive a written response, or will I have a written response by a particular time as I had an oral response? Yes, and I believe that the procedure, if I understand correctly, and I may not, is that the response should be a written one.
As indicated, the procedure is that the response is a written one. The questions to ministers, whether in this place or the other place, or questions raised, are already directed to the appropriate minister who responds. In this case, most ministers are not here. The response is made through the leader of the Senate when that response is received. In this case, there were two questions to two ministers that leader of the House has advised is being collated. But your question was whether the matter is on the order paper. It has not come off. It is on the order paper, and we look forward to having it removed by way of receiving the response. So certainly, as President, I look forward to receiving the response from the ministries to which the questions were directed so that we can remove the item from the order paper with the question having been provided in writing as is provided in Standing Order 17. Senator Hines.
Mr. President, I am just having a difficulty understanding how I received a response that was not based on a written response, and therefore if I actually received a response at the last sit-in or something else.
You had requested an update, and an update was given in terms of where the matter was. The response can only come as provided by the standing orders, but that was an update provided at that time. Any further comments on speaking on the adjournment? There being no further comments, anyone speaking on the adjournment, let me associate myself with the remarks from the leader of government business, and also join with, of course, speaking on behalf of Her Honor, Senator Thompson, my Deputy President. Wonderful tag team. But to thank all of you honorable members for your active engagement during the course of the last year. It has been an interesting year. I truly enjoyed sitting here, listening to the interesting, diverse perspectives, the rich infusion of your professional experience, your wide-ranging educational background, and different philosophical perspectives on the matters which are before us. Really is a source of richness, and I look forward in many years to come, some days looking back at Hansard, to look back on some of my favorite speeches your favorite speeches that I enjoyed listening to during this time. Although sometimes I'm tempted to jump in and offer a view here or there, but I remind myself that I'm here in this chamber sitting where Sir Fred Garland once sat, when he sat over there, next to him as leader of government business in the Senate 1994 to 99. In that role, I spoke. In this role, I do not speak. It is a reminder of the, one of my favorite hymns of the faith through all the changes and scenes of life. But let me also use that as a segue to remind us all and to remind those in the hearing of my voice that even though this season is wrapped in festive garment, we really should not forget the reason for the season, the core of the reason why we celebrate the birth of Christ and all that it entails, and let us remember to emulate him in our actions of peace and goodwill to all men, and let that be our source of joy, and not joy for joy's pure sake, as much fun as that may be. Just to note that the House of Assembly is adjourned until January 17th. Our work flows from the agenda there, and therefore when we have clear sight of that, the notice will come up. But just to give you an indication, barring any national circumstances which are provided for in the laws of Barbados that may require both houses to come on a matter, you can expect we will meet after January 17th, given the date of the adjournment in the other place. Let me thank you again for your service and your commitment to three important precepts: duty, honor, and country. Let me also associate with the thanking of our clerks at the table and the staff of Parliament, those who keep us safe, our police officers and security guards, our catering staff, and all the technicians whom we don't see them, but the wider public whom we serve feels and sees their work. They're before us ever seeing them. They have us on YouTube and on, it used to be 100.7, it's on 94.7 broadcasts, and have the website up and running. Let me thank the technical staff. It's really a reflection of the evolution of our Parliament and our openness in our Parliament. And of course, our cleaning staff, those who undertake our repairs, and I started in announcements thanking them for restoring us to our previous splendor, and I want to include them in this thanks as well. And just to remind that in addition to lunch, the Deputy President and I have asked the clerks to ensure that there's such libation associated with the post-lunch period, that those who are not in any need of that free assistance or have household duties to perform, or even if you do, you pause for a little while, a little fruit of the vine, so to be fermented, and a little Christmas ham and a little black cake here or there, whatever goodies there may be, we can sit and chat and wind down from this very active and hectic year. But all said, thank you once again. It's been a pleasure for the Deputy President and I to just steer the ship as you pull at the oars. Yes. And with that, the question is that this sitting of the Senate be adjourned, sine die. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. I've never heard you so robust. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This it is, stands adjourned.